T.K. Carter, a prolific character actor whose career spanned nearly 5 decades and included memorable roles in film and television, has died at the age of 69. Authorities in Duarte, California, where Carter lived, responded to a call Friday evening about an unresponsive male at his home and later pronounced him dead. Officials have not released a cause of death, and no foul play is suspected. Born Thomas Kent Carter on December 18, 1956 in New York City, and raised in Southern California's San Gabriel Valley, Carter began his screen career in the mid-1970s with guest appearances on television series such as Policewoman, Good Times, and The Jeffersons. His early work built a foundation for a long and varied career in both comedy and drama. Carter's breakthrough came in 1982 when he portrayed Knowles, the quick-witted cook in John Carpenter's horror classic The Thing, a role that remains iconic among genre fans. He followed this with memorable turns in films like Corvette Summer, 1978, Southern Comfort, 1981, Dr. Detroit, 1983, Runaway Train, 1985, Ski Patrol, 1990, and the 1996 animated live-action hit Space Jam ***, in which he voiced one of the animated Nerdlucks. On television, Carter became a familiar face to audiences of all ages. In the 1980s, he played Mike Fulton, a caring teacher on the popular sitcom Punky Brewster, and also appeared in Good Morning, Miss Bliss, the precursor to Saved by the Bell, The Sinbad Show, Family Matters, A Different World, The Steve Harvey Show, and NYPD Blue. He earned critical praise for his dramatic work as Gary McCullough in the HBO miniseries The Corner. His last screen appearances included roles in the 2023 series Dave and ABC's The Company You Keep. Over his long career, Carter demonstrated remarkable range, moving effortlessly from horror and comedy to heartfelt dramatic roles. His contributions earned him a reputation as one of Hollywood's most reliable and beloved character actors. Fans and colleagues have taken to social media to share tributes and memories in the wake of the news of his passing. While the official cause of Carter's death has not yet been disclosed, the absence of any suspicion of foul play has been confirmed by law enforcement. As details continue to emerge, many continue to reflect on a career that touched generations of viewers. Bob Weir, the influential guitarist, singer, and founding member of the legendary American rock band The Grateful Dead, has died at age 78. According to a statement from his family posted on his official website and social media pages, Weir died from underlying lung issues after recently beating cancer. Weir was born Robert Hall Parber in San Francisco and was adopted and raised by Frederick and Eleanor Weir. As a teenager in the mid-1960s, he teamed up with Jerry Garcia and other young musicians to form a folk group that evolved into the Grateful Dead, originally called Mother McCree's Uptown Jug Band and later the Warlocks before taking the name that would become iconic. Weir was admired not only for his music but also for his creativity and spirit. Interviewed in 2022, he described the band's songs as living critters, visitors from another world, reflecting his deep connection to the music and its enduring appeal. A beloved and pioneering figure in American music, Weir's influence extended beyond performance. The Grateful Dead's approach to touring, bootlegging, and fan engagement helped transform how rock bands connected with audiences, creating a vibrant culture around concert-going and community. Weir is survived by his family and a vast, multi-generational following of fans who continue to celebrate the band's expansive musical legacy. As news of his passing spread, tributes poured in from musicians and admirers alike, reflecting the deep imprint he left on music and culture. Iran is confronting one of the most significant and sustained waves of unrest in years, with nationwide protests that have stretched well into their second week.
Tonight, there's growing fallout in Minneapolis after the fatal shooting of Renee Good by an ICE agent. There were large organized protests today in the city calling for justice for Good and for ICE to leave Minnesota. There were also protests in cities nationwide in what organizers dubbed ICE Out for Good weekend of action. CBS's Usher Qureshi is in Minneapolis with more on that part of the story. Usher.
Initially fueled by a crippling economic crisis, the Iranian rial has plummeted to record lows against foreign currencies, and inflation has surged above 50%, pushing basic goods and food prices far beyond the reach of many Iranians. Widespread dissatisfaction with government economic mismanagement, including allegations of corruption and failure to address rising living costs, pushed shopkeepers, merchants and workers to take to the streets, particularly around Tehran's historic Grand Bazaar. Though triggered by economic hardship, protest slogans have increasingly targeted the political system itself, from chants of death to the dictator to calls for an end to clerical rule and, in some cases, outright regime change. This broader political dimension reflects widespread public anger not only over material conditions, but also over decades of social and political repression. What began in Tehran quickly spread to cities across Iran, with protesters taking to the streets in major population centers, including Mashhad, Isfahan, Shiraz, Qom, Tabriz,
Late Friday,
and
Good's
others.
wife,
Demonstrations have drawn a broad
gave a statement
coalition
to
of
Minnesota
Iranians,
Public Radio, saying in
shopkeepers,
part, "We
university
stopped to
students,
support our neighbors.
workers,
We
women,
had whistles.
and urban
They had
professionals.
guns." She was
United
part of
by
a community
frustration
response to more than
deteriorating
2,000 ICE
conditions
officers
and limited
deployed to the
avenues
Twin
for
Cities in a
political
Trump administration
expression.
blitz
Reports
against illegal
estimate that
immigration.
unrest has occurred
Today,
in hundreds
Minnesota's
of towns
congressional
and cities,
representatives tried to
making
visit
this
the
one
ICE
of the
offices
largest
in Minneapolis.
protest movements
They were
in
asked
Iran
to leave.
since the 2022
Last night, bedlam at two downtown Minneapolis hotels.
Despite a government
Protesters
blackout
created a
on
ruckus where ICE
communications and
agents were
state
thought to be
controls on
staying.
media,
Police made
footage
29
and accounts
arrests,
of protests
but Saturday
continue
the
to
city's
emerge
mayor
via
complimented
limited
citizens
satellite
for the
internet,
overall peaceful
messaging apps and
demonstrations.
diaspora
Will
network.
not
Iran's leadership
counter
has
Donald
responded
Trump's
with a mix of
chaos with
force
their own
and legal
brand of chaos
intimidation.
here.
Security
We in Minneapolis
forces
are
have
gonna do
deployed
this
tear
right.
gas, water cannons, and, according to
Minnesota
human rights
leaders are urging
organizations,
protesters
live
to stay
ammunition
peaceful tonight.
against
And
demonstrators.
Usher, what's the
At
latest
least
with the
dozens have been
investigation?
killed and thousands more detained, though exact casualty
FBI is
figures
still
remain
shutting out
difficult
state
to verify
investigators
due to
despite
the
local
government's
officials'
communications
demands that they
blackout.
participate.
In a stark
Sharika.
escalation
Usher
of
Qureshi in
rhetoric,
Minneapolis,
Iran's
thank you.
attorney general has publicly labeled protesters enemies of God, a charge that carries the possibility of the death penalty under Iranian law. The government has also severed most internet and telephone connections in an effort to stifle internal communication and hinder external coverage of the unrest. The protests have drawn intense international focus. The United States, under President Donald Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, has voiced strong support for the Iranian people and condemned state violence against demonstrators. Trump has issued stern warnings to Iran's leadership, including threatening consequences if its forces continue to kill peaceful protesters, with rhetoric that some analysts interpret as signaling U.S. readiness for potential intervention if repression escalates further. European leaders, including diplomats from Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, have condemned the Iranian government's crackdown and called for restraint and respect for human rights. Cultural figures and activists worldwide have also rallied around the movement, decrying the regime's internet blackout as a tool of repression. Iran's current protests reflect long-simmering economic and political tensions that have resurfaced repeatedly in recent years. While earlier movements, such as the 2022 protests following Mahsa Amini's death, were rooted in social and moral grievances, the latest wave underscores how economic collapse has intensified popular frustration and transformed it into broader demands for political accountability. As the standoff continues, many analysts warn that Iran stands at a critical juncture. The combination of domestic pressure, a hardening government response, and growing international scrutiny may reshape Iranian politics profoundly in the months and years ahead. Tens of thousands of demonstrators took to the streets of Minneapolis and dozens of other U.S. cities this weekend in protest. The protests began after Renee Nicole Good was shot and killed on January 7 during a large federal immigration enforcement operation in South Minneapolis. Federal officials maintain the ICE agent fired in self-defense, claiming Good weaponized her vehicle, while local leaders and eyewitnesses dispute that account, saying she posed no clear threat when she was shot. In Minneapolis, demonstrators, including indigenous dancers, migrant rights groups and immigrant families, marched near the intersection where Good was killed, chanting "Abolish ICE" and holding signs demanding justice and accountability. The outrage in Minneapolis quickly spread across the country, with more than 1,000 protests planned or held under banners such as "ICE Out for Good" and similar calls for federal oversight and reform. Demonstrations drew crowds in cities from New York and Philadelphia to Detroit, Austin, and beyond, with participants criticizing what they describe as a climate of fear and excessive force in recent federal immigration enforcement actions. In Minneapolis, authorities reported at least 29 arrests during one demonstration outside a local hotel when some protesters threw objects at law enforcement officers, though the vast majority of rallies remained peaceful. Local officials have been sharply critical of the federal response. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey has condemned the shooting and called for peace while disavowing the federal narrative that the incident was justified. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz has echoed calls for restraint and urged the public to avoid violence. Meanwhile, several Democratic members of Congress were denied entry to a regional ICE facility in St. Paul, amplifying tensions between federal authorities and elected officials seeking oversight of immigration enforcement operations. Civil rights organizations such as the ACLU and Indivisible have been central to organizing demonstrations and framing the movement as broader resistance to what they perceive as unchecked federal power in immigrant communities. The Minneapolis shooting comes amid the Trump administration's expanded immigration enforcement operations, including the deployment of over 2,000 federal officers to the Twin Cities area. That surge, intended to target fraud and migrant smuggling networks, has met fierce local backlash from residents and political leaders alike. Advocates for immigrants' rights argue the protests represent a long-building frustration with ICE's tactics and a demand for independent oversight of federal immigration enforcement. Critics of ICE have seized on the Minneapolis and related Portland incidents, where 2 others were shot and wounded, as emblematic of systemic issues requiring structural change. As demonstrations continue into the weekend, organizers stress peaceful protest and community solidarity, even as debates over federal authority, public safety, and civil liberties intensify across the nation. And now, you know the news.